Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today for the competition forum hosted by Energy Community Secretariat. I would like to invite for welcome remarks our Deputy Director, Marie-Therese.
Thank you, Tatiana. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Marie-Therese Richter-Kuhn. I'm head of the legal unit and deputy director at the Secretariat, and I have the pleasure to welcome you to this competition forum on behalf of the Energy Community Secretariat. I'm very grateful for the speakers having agreed to share their knowledge and experience with us. And I'm very grateful for the great participation also from representatives of the contracting parties, in particular of the state aid and competition authorities in our countries. As a competition and state aid lawyer, I'm particularly pleased that the competition forum has been revived. And I'm particularly grateful to our new colleague, Tatiana, who joined us recently in the Energy Community Secretariat to take this forum in her hands and make it happen. Thank you, Tatiana. Talking about particularities. Competition law is a bit of a particularity in the energy community. Why? Because although the energy community could be defined as an international organization with sectorial scope, energy, not surprisingly, the primary law of the energy community, the treaty, contains a section on competition law as a horizontal area of law to be brought up to EU standards in reality. This area of law does not only play a vital role through its intrinsic aim, but also in the context of accelerated integration, concretely the electricity market coupling between contracting parties and the energy community, contracting parties and the EU, which necessitates the incorporation of EU competition law. And the Energy Community Treaty offers such framework and can deliver if necessary. In our daily practice, we therefore deal with a variety of classical competition and state aid issues, but also with particularities, here again, of applying competition and state aid law to the energy sector. Hence also the two panels today. On the one hand, digitalisation of energy and what it means for competition. And on the other hand, how state aid policy and practice is getting greener and greener. What unites these two topics? How can competition and state aid law support progress? With this, I would like to already introduce our keynote speaker today, Mrs. Stephanie Nieuwboek from Client Earth. Stephanie is a Belgian qualified lawyer focusing on aligning the EU state aid rules with the EU Green Deal and the climate goals. Stephanie, please, the floor is yours. Feed us with the first food of thought for this competition forum and may it set the ground for very fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me well. Good morning, distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to speak here today on a topic that is at the heart of the energy transition, the greening of state aid policy and practice. At Client Earth, a non-profit environmental law organization that uses the power of the law to create systemic change and protect the planet, we approach this issue as both lawyers and environmental advocates. We are keenly aware that state aid is not only a powerful policy tool, it also shapes private investment decisions. That means that state aid, if not properly designed and controlled, can either accelerate or derail Europe's path to climate neutrality. So today I'd like to reflect on where we are and where we should be headed when it comes to greening state aid policy and practice. The primary aim of state aid control is indeed to protect the internal market, not the climate and the environment. Nevertheless, state aid has a key role to play in supporting the transition, but even more in eliminating environmentally harmful subsidies, such as fossil fuel subsidies. Let's first start with the positive role of state aid. For decades, environmental considerations were largely peripheral in state aid law. That began to shift meaningfully with the 2014 guidelines on environmental and energy aid, and even more with its successor, the 2022 Climate, Energy and Environmental Aid Guidelines, or the CEAC, and the respective provisions of the General Block Exemption Regulation. They enshrine environmental protection and decarbonization as core objectives, no longer special exceptions to the market economy, but guiding principles for aid design. This means, for example, that aid must support objectives aligned with the EU Green Deal and climate neutrality by 2050. It also means that aid to the most polluting fossil fuels is prohibited with very few exceptions. The upcoming Clean Industrial Deal Aid Framework, or the CSAF, which will be adopted tomorrow, takes a similar approach. But let's be honest, the greening of state aid is far from complete. Many gaps remain, both in policy design and in implementation. First, even within frameworks explicitly aimed at environmental objectives, such as the SEAC, there are critical shortcomings. Aid can, for instance, be given to fossil gas and carbon capture projects without limited eligibility or stringent environmental conditionality. The same goes for aid to energy-intensive users, where no transformative improvements are required. This risks locking in carbon-intensive infrastructure and delaying the energy transition. Second, other state aid frameworks pursuing different objectives, such as regional development, rescue and restructuring, or agriculture, are largely devoid of meaningful environmental safeguards. We, for instance, saw a large energy generation utility in difficulty receive important amounts of aids to mainly support the switch from coal to fossil gas without any decarbonization conditionality, although such conditions would normally apply had the aid been granted under the SEAC. This makes the state aid rules inconsistent from an environmental perspective. And third, there is a lack of transparency regarding how state aid is actually spent, as not all member states are as diligent in reporting aid, and there is no single register used across the EU. Compliance with environmental conditions tied to certain aid are also not sufficiently monitored. These inconsistent reporting practices weakens public scrutiny and democratic oversight of potentially harmful subsidies. So, instead of driving systemic change, substantial aid continues to support the status quo, propping up existing models and supporting laggards rather than funding transformative change, such as circular economy practices and true green innovation. This leads to lock-in of environmentally harmful practices for many years to come. So where do we go from here? Well, at Client Earth, we believe the following principles should guide the next phase of reform. First, we should integrate the do no significant harm principle in line with the environmental integration principle of Article 11 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union in all state aid assessments. This can be achieved by creating a uniform set of criteria to ensure aid does not significantly harm climate, water, biodiversity, or circular economy goals, inspired from the EU taxonomy and as already applied in IPCEI decisions. Equally, we should integrate the polluter pays principle, a key principle of EU environmental law, explicitly in all state aid guidelines and make it a mandatory assessment criterion across all aid categories. State aid cannot be used to finance pollution control or regulatory compliance. These costs should be borne by the polluters themselves. We should also strengthen aid conditionality by linking aid to clear, measurable environmental performance indicators, such as emission reductions, energy efficiency targets, or phase-out plans, subject to reporting and make aid repayable if conditions are not met. And finally, we should enhance transparency of spent aid and public consultation in aid processes, especially where aid significantly affects land use, ecosystems, or emissions. But you may be asking yourself, why does this matter so much? Well, because public funding, whether in the form of grants, guarantees, or tax breaks, is not infinite. Every euro of aid spent on prolonging harmful activities, such as fossil fuels, is a euro not spent on clean activities. Public money must support, not undermine, the environmental and climate goals that governments have committed to. And because this moment, midway through the 2020s, is decisive. Greener state aid is not just a matter of environmental responsibility. The policy choices made today and supported with aid will shape emissions, competitiveness, resilience, energy security, and fairness for decades to come. A generally green state aid regime can help us avoid stranded assets, protect public resources, and build the net zero economy Europe needs. But to get there, state aid control must stay ambitious and vigilant. At this point, we can say that the foundations for greening state aid are there, but that the structure remains incomplete. We have the legal tools, now we need the political will and rigorous implementations across all EU and energy community countries. Client Earth, together with partners across Europe, will continue to insist that state aid works for the climate, not against it. I wish you an instructive and inspiring conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome once again, dear participants and guests. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Tiana Milenka. I recently joined Energy Community Secretariat as the capacity of competition and energy lawyer. I'm very excited to host and, as Marita said, revive this competition forum, and I think it will be a good tradition to keep on. The very first panel, we will dive into the topic of digitalization of energy and its competitive implication and what it really means. I think the topics of competition, growth, and innovation are intrinsically interlinked, and it's considered basically a hot topic, and we are happy to have such a distinguished speaker today. And without undue delay, let me introduce our first speaker. Here we go. Let me introduce our first distinguished speaker, Marieke Scholz, who is the head of unit Antitrust Energy Environment with the European Commission. And please, Marieke, share your wisdom with us. We are all looking forward to it. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and good morning to everyone. I'm very happy that you have me here today for this discussion, and I'm more happy to speak about a topic that's normally associated with other sectors like the ICT sector and not so much the energy sector, where actually digitalization has had a profound impact, and this for already quite some time. But I'll come to that in a minute. Before going into the details, just a typical disclaimer. So I'm speaking here today in personal capacity. And these are my views, and I'm not representing necessarily those of the European Commission. I had a slide presentation. I don't know, Tatiana, whether we can upload it because I'm not seeing it
just a minute,
yet.
Just a minute.
Okay. There it is. Thank you very much. You can directly go to the next slide, which contains a brief outline of what I would like to cover during the next 15 minutes. I'm not seeing it yet. It's still the cover slide.
Second, Marieke, just a second.
There we go. Thank you very much. So as I just said, this is a short outline of what I'd like to cover in the next 15 minutes. So I'll start a bit with a policy context. Then I'll dive a bit into the benefits of digitalization, in particular for competition in the energy markets. And I'll finish with a short overview of the areas that should be monitored closely from a competition law perspective to make sure that energy markets remain competitive and that they continue to deliver the benefits of competition to both businesses and consumers. And with this, I will directly dive into your policy context. You have the slide already in front of you. As you can see from that, actually, the topic of digitalization in the energy sector has been with us for almost 2 decades already. And you can basically distinguish 4 main phases in this development over the last 20 years. So there is the first phase that was laying the groundwork, so the enabling framework for the entry of digitalization in the energy sector. That started with a 3rd energy package, which was adopted in 2009, which you see on the left hand of the slide. In that 3rd energy package, the member states were called upon to initiate the rollout of smart metering systems. These are these devices that are used to measure and record energy consumption of consumers. And they're also able to transmit that data to the utility company, mostly in real time. So it's a very precious source of data for the provision of many services. And the 3rd energy package set a goal of equipping more than 80% of consumers with such a smart meter by 2020, subject to a positive cost-benefit analysis. In that context, the Commission also set up the Smart Grids Task Force in 2011 to help achieve that goal, which has been very successfully working on the implementation of these objectives until the end of last year, when it was succeeded by the Smart Energy Expert Group, which is now advising on policy and regulatory matters in this area. And after this first phase of pre-digitalization, as you can call it, we had the phase where actually digitalization entered more formally. EU energy policy, which started in 2015 with the adoption of the Energy Union Strategy, which was a key priority of the Juncker Commission, and where for the first time the role of digital technologies in the development of the energy sector was formally recognized. The 3rd phase, then after a number of policy documents going in the same direction, started with a clean energy package adopted in 2019. You can call it a kind of consolidation phase where it was pretty much established that digitalization is key and crucial in transforming our energy system to deliver clean and more sustainable energy. And it focused on promoting standardization of smart metering and also empowering consumers in this area. And this then led into a period that started in 2022, where we were focusing more on developing dedicated digitalization strategies, really focusing on the benefit that digitalization can deliver in the energy system. So in 2020, there was the Digitalizing the Energy System Action Plan, which was the first dedicated strategy at EU level aimed at fostering the digitalization of the energy sector. And in the current mandate, you've surely seen there was the Clean Industrial Deal, which has been adopted in February this year, together with the Affordable Energy Action Plan, which are both aimed at boosting the industrial competitiveness of Europe while advancing the decarbonization, are basically key documents that are also recognizing digitalization as a key enabler of a more resilient and more affordable energy in the EU. And since digitalization brings lots of benefits, but also contains potential vulnerability for Europe, there was also the announcement of a strategic roadmap for digitalization and artificial intelligence for the energy sector, which is supposed to be adopted next year and will focus in particular on European AI solutions. So all of this shows that over time, the digital transformation of the energy sector has become a key component and one of the key enablers for a transition to clean and sustainable energy. And that is very much linked to the many benefits, to which I will now come on the next slide. So this slide, of course, cannot do justice to the many positive aspects that digitalization has on the energy sector. So it's just trying to provide a snapshot to give you some examples in a more tangible manner. And it's by far not exhaustive. Due to the limited time we have, I will not go into every element listed there, but just pick out a few of them to show you these benefits. So if you start on the left with the smart metering systems, for example, these smart metering systems have enabled a much easier and faster switching of suppliers. And this was, for example, very visible in the UK when it was still part of the EU, where central switching service was installed, which was enabled by smart meters and digital technologies. And that allowed to reduce the switching times for consumers from several weeks to 1 day only, so 24 hours. And this, of course, allowed then at the same time a real-time tariff comparison and fostered switching by consumers to a really significant extent. And by having more ability to switch, suppliers, of course, had to adjust, and they couldn't rely on keeping customers. They needed to really innovate and focus on enhancing user experience and service quality to retain their customers. At the same time, smart metering systems have also allowed to reduce the costs for market operations through automated billing and remote reading, for example. And there are very interesting figures that the French operator, the French DSO Enedis, has published after it had installed its Linky smart metering device in more than 90% of the households in France. And it's estimated the cost savings made through this technology to around 1 billion, which is really huge, and which also shows that smaller companies beyond the traditional utilities can basically enter the market based on this technology in a much easier and faster way and a more cost competitive way than was the case before. If you look at algorithmic trading as another example of how digitalization is basically reaching the energy sector, of course, we all know it increases market liquidity and it enhances competition and trading markets through that. But it also lowers transaction costs because companies are not obliged to have a dedicated trading desk with a lot of traders to do this activity, but they can rely on automated tools for that purpose. And this allows, in particular, smaller companies and new entrants to compete on a much more equal footing with incumbents in those markets. And these automated trading tools also allow, for example, in power markets, in particular in the intraday market, for increased multi-homing on power exchanges, which is particularly important in the last hour before the delivery of the power due to the integration of renewables, which are much more difficult to predict in their generation. Turning to the last example, which is blockchain. Blockchain is still at the beginning of its development, I would say, but it's clear that also that can have a really profound impact on how competition is taking place in the energy sector. It allows, for example, for a direct participation by smaller producers and also prosumers, so consumers that are also generating their own electricity, mostly based on solar panels, and basically put the excess production back into the system. And also startups, because they no longer have to go through centralized intermediaries, but can directly participate through this technology as a market actor, and thereby increase competition from non-traditional players. Going to the next slide. This is basically, there are areas that we need to monitor very closely in this development, like everything in life that has benefits. There are also some risks associated with certain developments, and these risks need to be closely monitored to make sure that they don't materialize, so that we can really harness the benefits of digitalization in the energy sector to the fullest extent. The most obvious area is data. That's the first area I've listed on that slide. Digitalization, of course, goes with an explosion of data points that are generated and collected and can be used for different purposes. And in particular, consumption and smart metering data, which I've referred to before, is therefore key to a transition towards a sustainable energy system, as it allows to facilitate a more accurate billing and also demand-side management. DSOs, distribution service providers, they have a key role to play in many member states. They are the primary responsible for the installation, management, and maintenance of the smart metering infrastructure, and also for the data transmission. So their role is key to make sure that all players in the market have access to, in a transparent manner and in a non-discriminatory manner, to this data, which is particularly important for new types of services, demand-side services offered by, for example, independent aggregators that group smaller energy consumers to allow them for efficiency of scale and better pricing. and also demand response providers, which offer programs for consumers to participate in that allow them to reduce or shift their energy consumption against a financial incentive. There is a regulatory framework in place that should provide sufficient safeguards. These are in particular the requirements for unbundling of DSOs, but also data access provisions that were adopted in the Commission implementing regulation of 2023, which concerns interop requirements and non-discriminatory and transparent procedures for access to metering and consumption data. So hopefully, based on those provisions, we shouldn't see necessarily a lot of competition cases or cases similar to what the Italian NCA investigated in 2015 to 2016 when they were looking into Enel and certain practices that were analyzed as a possible abuse of a dominant position in the smart metering service market, where Enel had been trying to prevent access by competing service providers at the downstream level to the benefit of its affiliated group company active at that level. So these cases, hopefully, we will not see, and we will hopefully also not see issues of delayed handing over of data that's important for switching of consumers. But we have to be very vigilant to make sure that there is no loophole in the system. And this is also the reason why NRAs and Acer and SER have called out for making sure that basically the data access is happening in a manner as it has to enable everyone to offer the services that are needed on the demand side. Similar data issues can arise in the EV charging space or in the charging of electric vehicles, where also a lot of data is being generated and can be used for the provision of complementary services to enhance consumer experience, like, for example, mobile applications helping you to find the service stations to recharge your EV or other services that could be of use in that area. Also there, we have a regulatory framework that promotes data sharing and interoperability that should hopefully take care of many of the issues that could arise in that space. But nevertheless, also their vigilance is important to make sure that there is no loophole and that if there is an issue, we can come in early enough to prevent things from going the wrong way. Linked to that is still in the EV space. There is the question of vertically integrated players, which we are seeing developing more and more in that space. We have done at the Commission level a study on competition in publicly accessible recharging infrastructure in 2023 that has looked a bit into the developments of the market. And there already we have seen trends towards fully integrated service providers that are not only managing the physical electric vehicle recharging infrastructure, but also offering all the services down the supply chain to consumers. And this, of course, is not a problem as such, but it does create the ability and sometimes also the incentives of benefiting the downstream operations and providing them with a competitive advantage. This is something that our Italian colleagues are currently looking into with regard to NLX. The case is mentioned on the slide, and they're looking into a potential margin squeeze strategy through the provision or through the setting of the EV charging fees at wholesale level in a way that doesn't allow the independent e-mobility service providers that are depending on this access to compete effectively with the incumbent subsidiary active at the downstream level. This investigation is still ongoing, so it hasn't been concluded, and we're looking forward to seeing the final findings of this investigation. Now, turning to the next slide, I know that my time is up, so I'll try to be very quick. Sorry. So we have also in this space, of course, there's a possibility for platform issues arising as digitalization increases and progresses. We may see the development of more multi-service platforms, for example, for EV charging, home automation, or also in flexibility markets. And there is, of course, a possibility that we may see similar practices as those we have already looked at as competition authorities in the ICT space. like platform access issues, interop issues, or also self-preferencing practices. So this is also an area to watch out for. And the last area I wanted to mention is related to algorithmic trading. I've already referred to the many benefits that automated high-frequency trading can have for the market. And it is actually something that is being used more and more in both energy and also commodity markets. And while it can enhance liquidity and also trading efficiency, there is also an associated with possible coordinated behavior or market manipulation. These risks are set out in a recent study that the Dutch National Competition Authority and the regulatory authority who have joint oversight over algorithms and energy trading have looked into. So I've done a market study how basically algorithmic trading works in wholesale energy markets with a particular focus on exchange traded funds. So what they have identified in that area is not necessarily applicable by default also to other markets, but it does show where certain risks can come from and which are the areas that we have to closely monitor. So as you can see from this short overview, digitalization has profoundly changed the energy sector, and it has hugely improved many aspects of the functioning of energy markets. And I do believe that if we keep a close eye on the possible risks that are associated to these developments, to make sure that they don't materialize in the future, we can make sure that we are able to reach the full benefits that digitalization can bring as a key enabler to the energy transition, to the clean and sustainable transition in the sector. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dear Marika, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom that you accumulated during almost, I think, 20 years at the European Commission. Thank you for the insights. That is really, I would say, a hot topic. So sorry for the jargon. And I think we're here at the front row of the discussion of what's coming in terms of artificial intelligence, its impact on, especially on energy markets, and looking at it through the lens of competition. Thank you for being here with us and sharing your insights. Really very valuable, very insightful. Now I would like to welcome our next speaker, who will further open up our eyes on what artificial intelligence is bringing to us, or what perhaps it brought, most likely already. Teodora Groza, Dr. Teodora Groza is a lecturer in sciences for Paris, and her areas of interest are artificial intelligence governance, the relationship between innovation and regulation, and the impact of new technologies on regulatory techniques. She is also a research fellow for the TREC AI project, an initiative co-hosted by Sciences Po Law School and co-led the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. I could go on talking about her titles and research breakthrough, but let Dr. Teodora Groza speak this herself. It would be more appropriate and interesting. Teodora, please take the floor and help us better understand if artificial intelligence tools can actually ensure regulatory oversight, detection, and enforcement by governments in various areas, particularly in competition on energy markets. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm usually used to speaking to antitrust audiences, so this is a bit of an adventure. I'm looking forward to it. But based on the presentation we've just heard, I see that there are lots of synergies between the work we do with the Computational Antitrust Project and your work as the energy community. Can I share my slides, or will you take care of it? Up. Okay. Up. Perfect. You can all see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I'm here to speak about the Computational Antitrust Project, which is an initiative hosted by Codex, the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. Our aim with this project is basically to analyze how computational tools, so digital tools, AI, and so on can help us improve antitrust compliance, enforcement, and in the long term, also antitrust policy. Now, the reason why I was invited last minute to join this conversation is because every year we publish a report where we ask the agencies from our network to share with us their developments in terms of implementing computational tools in their enforcement practices. And our fourth annual report was published just last week. We had a big launch event at the OECD where we presented the report in depth. You can access the report through this QR code. It's available open access on SSRN. But because today this audience is focused on energy, my goal is not to walk you through all the granularities of the report, but rather to emphasize what I think is most interesting to this particular audience and what can give us most food for thought. So in my presentation, I will focus on 4 things. First, I'm going to talk about what I think are the most breakthrough innovations we've seen over the past year. And you'll see in a second that these are quite utopic things, and I was very impressed to see what the agencies are doing. Then, what I think is most relevant from the tools I've seen developed to the energy regulators are the tools focused on tracking prices and monitoring prices. So I'm going to spend a second on that. I'm going to then talk about some general applications, which I think would help energy regulators as much as antitrust regulators. And I'm going to end on an open note with the challenges we've seen in the adoption of these tools and what work is left to be done in this space. So let's start with the breakthrough innovations. I was really surprised to see that in Singapore, the antitrust authority has developed a so-called AI Markets Toolkit, which is basically a software program that functions as an interrogation that guides companies developing AI models in assessing whether the models they develop and deploy comply with antitrust rules. So this toolkit is basically aimed at preemptively helping companies make sure that their operations do not breach antitrust rules or unfair trading practices. And on top of that, the companies which actually implement this toolkit, in case they are found to be in breach of antitrust rules, they get more preferential treatment. So it's really interesting to see how with tools like this, the agency is not only helping companies with their compliance and thereby reducing their legal fees, obviously, but it's also cleaning up a bit of its workspace because they have more time and attention that can be distributed to more difficult issues. Also very interesting, the Italian competition agency has managed to reverse engineer the ranking algorithms that are set in place by hotel and e-commerce platforms. And in doing so, they have managed to identify whether the algorithms set in place are actually compliant with the antitrust rules or not. And lastly, and this is really utopic, in Poland, the competition authority also functions as a consumer protection authority, and they have been doing really cutting-edge neuroscience experiments where they're trying to identify how consumers react to dark patterns. Dark patterns are manipulative designs which are made to trick users of online platforms. So they have assessed visual attention, emotions, and also neural stimuli to identify whether consumers respond in the same way to dark patterns based on their income and education levels. Spoiler alert, they do. So regardless of our education levels and of our income, we are all equally susceptible to these dark patterns. So now, moving on from these very advanced innovations to tools that are more relevant to the day-to-day operations of energy regulators, we've seen a lot of agencies develop tools that are aimed at tracking prices. So in Taiwan, for instance, the agency has developed a model which can break a long time segment into time series, and it can analyze whether within this time series, the price relative to demand elasticities has been economically reasonable. And I think that's quite fantastic. In Pakistan as well, the agency has a price dashboard which tracks the prices of essential commodities and identifies whether within these prices there are any anomalies which are worth looking into. And on top of that, the agency is also looking into the prices of branded goods to assess whether the discount offers that we are all very familiar with as consumers are actually real discounts or just deceptive offers which are made to trick consumers. And then in Colombia, at the other end of the world, the agency has developed 2 tools. One which looks at the prices from the websites of supermarkets, and the second one, which analyzes whether the prices for airplane tickets with for domestic flights with the hand luggage included are within the normal range or whether they are unreasonably low or unreasonably high. So you can see that there's lots of effort being deployed in the space of tracking prices. Now, in terms of general tools, which I think would also benefit energy regulators, in Spain, the agency has developed a machine learning tool that was trained on the entire data set of their previous cases, which can identify in documents suspicious behaviors. So if you feed this tool a contract or even a news article, it can identify whether something that is in breach of competition policy has been happening in that specific fact pattern. Similarly, in Lithuania, they have developed an AI-enhanced document review platform, which can not only detect different types of cartels, so information exchanges, price setting, market allocation, but it can also assess the emotional and behavioral intentions behind the text. And very interestingly, this tool can be deployed in 100 languages, so it has the potential to actually help agencies from across the world. Then in Singapore, the competition authority has developed a merger decision chatbot. So think of it as a sort of in-house ChatGPT, which can help the agency staff navigate their precedents easily by asking questions, which are then answered based only on the case law of the agency. And similarly, in France, the competition authority has developed a similar large language model, which can answer questions of the agency staff based on their internal data. And similar general applications are also virtual data rooms, which have been developed notably in Hungary, which give access to case files to absolutely any interested party. So it's not just the agency, but also stakeholders, third parties, average consumers, anyone really. In Luxembourg, the agency has an AI assistant that can help the staff manage their documents. And lastly, in countries like Malawi and Malaysia, the agencies have developed workflow management tools which help the agency staff navigate the progress of cases and even warn them when cases are lagging behind or when they're missing deadlines. So all these tools are actually really helping the agency staff navigate their work, but also manage their workflows better. And I think that they have a real potential to improve antitrust compliance, but also potentially the work of energy regulators. So now, what are the challenges that are still to be tackled? Interestingly enough, even though we've been doing this report for the past 4 years, this was the first year really when we've seen agencies mention the issue of human-machine interactions. And we've had several agencies actually say explicitly that you can really have the absolute best tools on the market, but if you don't have the staff that can deploy those tools effectively, the tools are basically useless. So then the question is, how do you train staff with legal training to learn how to effectively use and supervise AI tools? And many of these tools actually require human input, even though some of them are just tools that can be deployed by anyone. Like, for instance, workflow managers, you don't need any technical capabilities for that. But some of the tools, like, for instance, the LLMs or the chatbots, do require some technical literacy from the agency staff. And then the question is, how do you ensure that you have an adequate interaction between your tools and your human agents? And then relatedly, there's the question of explainability. So because competition authorities are part of the public administration, all the principles of good administration apply. And also when these tools actually trigger investigations which lead to court proceedings, the question is, how do you make sure that the judges can understand how the tools that are being deployed have reached the decisions that they have reached, or how they have identified the suspicious patterns? And this is a real question because, as you know, there's often the metaphor of AI as a black box and of how we don't really know what happens inside the algorithm. And the challenge of ensuring that these algorithms are actually transparent and explainable and that their decisions can be reverse engineered and easily explained to judges is a real problem. And the last issue, and I will stop here because I see that my time is up. There's the issue of recruiting and retaining technical staff. As you know, software engineers have lots of opportunities in the industry, and it's quite hard for the agencies to offer any matching salaries. And then the question is, first, how do you recruit technical staff? And second, how do you retain it? I think that the agencies are betting a lot on the premium of pursuing a public interest service. And this works in many cases, but there are also many countries which are still struggling to recruit technical staff that can help them develop their in-house tools and also fine-tune their existing models. And on that, I will stop here, and I hope that you can all start thinking about how we deal with these challenges so that we can keep developing computational tools to improve antitrust, but also energy regulation, compliance, and enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sincerely, on behalf of Secretariat and I think all participants for sharing your insights on this very interesting and very hot as well topic. And special thank you for being able to join really, really last minute as one of the speakers due to some agencies couldn't attend. So much appreciated. Thank you for your core insights. And now I would like to get closer to energy markets and explore approaches and hurdles on the way to fair competition on electricity wholesale markets, and also touch upon if actually digitalization can help to get to these goals. Now the speaker will be Walter Bolz, a senior energy advisor at Baker McKenzie, ex-chairman of the supervisory board of the gas TSO of Ukraine, a former vice chairman of the Acer Board of Regulators and vice president of the Council of European Energy Regulators. Mr. Bolz also headed the Austrian Regulatory Authority in control for 15 years. In his role as executive director of E-Control, Walter was responsible for electricity and gas markets regulations as well as renewable energies. Walter advises international clients from energy sector on strategic topics in relation to regulatory and energy strategy aspects. He has been engaged in various consultancy projects and active in Austria, Germany, Ukraine, Moldova, as well as in Brussels at the EU level. We are very excited to have you, Walter, and I'm personally appreciate our collaboration at the gas TSO of Ukraine, and I know it's been not easy, and you have the tremendous experience accumulated through years in different institutions and organizations, and you were and are in the core of energy regulation. Please share your wisdom and insights. Looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanya. I will try to focus mostly on Europe, although I must say I found the presentation of Theodora quite intriguing and interesting. Lots of things I've never heard of in many parts of the world. I will have basically, let's say, 3 topics. First, I would like to set the scene a little bit. Then I briefly talk about the legal foundation. I'll be brief on that, as we have lots of people who are even know a lot more than me on competition law. And then I'll talk briefly about digitalization and kind of, what it really promises to do and have some conclusions here. Now, setting the scene. I think electricity, as we are all surely aware, is really essential for every country in all sectors. And we have been seeing in the last, let's say, 20, 25 years that any distortions to the market does create huge problems. So on the one side, security of supply is really a very crucial element. And we have seen in the energy crisis 2 years ago that if something goes wrong on security of supply and energy, which started with gas, but of course had direct impact on electricity, does create huge problems for the economy, for the society. And I think what is maybe also something that has been put to the top of the agenda is that fair prices are essential. And fair meaning internationally competitive prices for electricity, that's wholesale mostly, but also retail. And this is a problem that we are really struggling in Europe right now, because our European prices are just plain too high. And they are probably 50–60% higher than, you know, Asian prices, and they are maybe 3 times the US levels. So we do have structural problems, and, you know, the EU is working on it, and many member states on coming up with ideas what could be done to get prices a little bit down. They don't have to go down to US levels, but they should definitely be not much higher than what we had before the energy crisis, because the situation hasn't changed that much. Now, distorted prices pose a really great risk for consumers, for the economy, and for also political stability, as some people from especially some Eastern European countries can still remember on, you know, electricity price riots and problems like that. If prices are too low, of course, initially that sounds like a good thing, but of course it means there is a medium-term risk to security of supply because people will not invest. And in the integrated market, you'll see that low prices mean an outflow of electricity to higher priced areas, which puts strain on the system. And when you think back a few years when the electricity prices were extremely high, Spain intervened by subsidizing gas for power generation. And this was only possible because Spain is an energy island, or Spain and Portugal are an energy island, and the line to France is has very small capacity. So the low electricity price in Spain, which was achieved with very high cost of the budget, could not be fully exported to France, which would have been the normal case. So we have a problem with too low prices, but we also have a problem with too high prices. There are social problems, economic problems, political problems. So prices need to be really aligned with the cost, a fair cost of all the commodities and the system. And in Europe, we are struggling with costs that are in kind of almost every aspect a little bit too high. So in aggregate, we are burdened with relatively high prices in Europe. This has a historical component. It has to do with many decades of monopoly situation, with a huge capacity that was built before liberalization, overcapacity, which after liberalization was kind of, you know, reduced step by step. Now we have added a lot of renewable generation in, let's say, nationally different and not very well coordinated way in Europe, which means, again, the cost of this renewable generation is relatively high compared to other parts, because practically renewable generation costs in reasonable locations are already the lowest form of electricity that you can produce. Now, the EU internal market was created as part of the rationale being to lower prices, to bring prices down to somewhat reasonable internationally competitive levels. And of course, the internal market can help and has helped to break up monopolies. But I think we are still a long way from claiming success there. What we have also noticed, which is not surprising, anybody working in competition law is aware of that, any monopoly will fight as long as possible to retain the dominant market position. Because a monopoly is a very profitable situation to be in. And if you are a company that has this monopoly, and that really is true from everywhere in the world, they will fight, you know, tooth and nails to retain that position. So I guess the question is now, what can we do to open up the markets to competition without creating too many problems? In the electricity market, we have now like 20+ years of experience. And while there have been some pretty good successes, so we have in large parts of Europe a well-working wholesale market where we put a lot of effort in it. But we are still a long way from having a fully competitive market down to, let's say, medium-sized customers. And I'm not even talking about households, which is a different story. Now, let's briefly go into the legal framework within which we operate. We have the competition law. You all know the articles 101 and 102. And we have the specific, sector-specific European electricity regulatory law, which has grown to quite some size and some level of complexity that even I, who has worked 20 plus years in this area, sometimes am kind of puzzled as to, the multitude of detailed rules that we've come up. We have many tertiary legal rules in the form of network codes, ACER remit guidances, some national things, some, let's say, interesting ways of putting legal obligations into effect by approving a couple 100 pages of general terms and conditions of transmission system operators and so on. And then, of course, some national rules and laws on top of that. I would not go into the competition law, assuming that everybody kind of is aware of it. But I will briefly touch on some issues of electricity regulatory law. They are, let's say, ex ante rules other than competition law, who kind of sets in mostly after something has happened. And of course, the electricity regulatory rules apply to every market participants, irrespective of market share. So the market organization is binding on every market participant. What we have been able to do, maybe better than in competition law in general and many other sectors, we have been able to start collecting and transmitting data for surveillance. And it's not only in the remit, in the energy trading field, but also in some other sectors. So we have a fairly good overview of what's going on, which doesn't mean we're able to solve the problems, but at least we know what's going on. And this is somewhat comparable to the financial sector, but of course it's totally different to many other commercial sectors that we don't have any specific sectors regulation. We have the Electricity Market Directive and regulation, and then we have the regulation on wholesale market integrity and transparency remit, which was a pretty big step because the first time in the electricity sector, there was now a full transparency about prices, all transactions, and everything that's going on in the market. And when you look at enforcement decisions by regulators in the last couple of years, a lot of them deal with remit, because here we have full data transparency. We have ACER, who is collecting all the data. So we have some European harmonization and standardization, which is not necessarily the case in many other sectors. Another important structural aspect of the electricity market rules are that we have an unbundling obligation, knowing that there was a monopoly in most electricity markets. The legislator decided to enforce a proper separation of the infrastructure-oriented networks from the commercially oriented sale and production of electricity. And although it took maybe 10 years to enforce it across the EU, I think we have in, let's say, 80%, 75% of the EU member states now a reasonably well-working unbundling. I would say on the transmission level, it's working 90%, on the distribution level, let's say 60%, but we are getting there, and it has provided a lot of the benefits, or enabled a lot of the benefits for making the electricity market working. And we have also spent a big effort in designing the rules for trading venues, for electricity exchanges, and we have created a large number of specific markets, intraday markets, short-term markets, markets for balancing energy, which are not European, but they're at least covering some regions or at least a couple of countries. So there has been a lot of success, and as we have digitization as part of our topic today, this would not have been possible without a high degree of automation of IT system, of harmonization of algorithms, and so on. So there has been quite some success on establishing this, and since there were a number of mergers, structural changes that occurred over the last couple of years, the competition authorities and sometimes energy regulators working together with competition authorities were able to enforce some, let's say, market or competition enhancing measures like capacity releases, releasing cross-border capacities, releasing generation capacities, enforcing some trading on gas exchanges. So we have been successful if in cases where the expertise of the energy regulators was combined with competition authorities' enforcement possibilities, when there were cases where competition authorities had to become active because of mergers and things like that. So there have been some successes, but I think the problem is that the outcome on the market is still pretty far from what we have intended to achieve. So electricity wholesale prices are still relatively high, although the generation cost is not that much higher in Europe as in China, because we buy the same coal and the same gas on the global market as they do for producing, and we buy the same renewable generation systems. Often we buy it from China, so they are not a lot more expensive in Europe than they would be in Asia. Nonetheless, we are still suffering from relatively high cost of electricity. One other aspect is important as part of the electricity regulatory framework, the independence of the national regulatory authorities and the set of competences and responsibilities was harmonized across the EU with ACER. There is a coordinating entity for the regulators, and after a big infight over a couple of years, we were also established that ACER can make decisions if national energy regulators cannot come to an agreement on topics that need to be harmonized on the EU level. So we have established now the energy regulators as a sector-specific competition authority, which was a big step. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of resistance from many member states and, of course, from the industry. But that, I think, was probably one of the biggest successes and has come very handy, especially in the area of energy trading, in our case, electricity trading. REMIT is basically MiFID adopted to the electricity and gas sector. So it prohibits the same things as we know from the financial sector: no insider trading, fair treatment of everybody on information release, risk management. So we have a large set of rules in REMIT. And when you look at the sanctions issued by energy regulators over the last couple of years, most of them relate to REMIT violations. There have been relatively few bigger fines. I mean, there might be small ones, a couple of €1,000, but bigger fines have practically almost exclusively been issued for REMIT violations in the last couple of years. And that does show that REMIT is effective. And especially as we have this data, let's say, reporting obligation to ACER, we have a consistent set of data, and ACER can look at the data. And even if a national regulator is a little bit, let's say, overwhelmed by the complexity, there's still ACER who could be there to push them a little bit and say, okay, come on, get things done. When we look at a few cases, there have been, I picked a couple of cases from, let's say, Eastern European countries. There have been some cases where typical REMIT violations have been identified and fines have been issued. ACER publishes a periodic report, a newsletter on REMIT cases. So it's kind of interesting to read, and it does show that there is an effective enforcement, could be more effective, but is relatively effective across the EU. And I think that's a very important part, because without some form of really enforcement, there would not be that level of trust in the market. Now, that's just two examples. And now let's get a little bit more practical, and this is how to open the market in practice. My experience, having been 15 years in charge of one regulator and worked a lot in the European level, is that competition law and regulatory law in most cases are not really sufficient to break up monopolies. The monopolists have, of course, not been, I mean, we cannot blame them for achieving a quasi-monopoly or a dominant market position, because that was the historical development. So they were charged with being the monopolist in a specific country, and neither the competition law nor the energy regulatory law provides a direct practical tool to break up those monopolies. Sometimes, if there is at least somewhat sufficient capacity with neighboring countries, and the interconnectors are managed properly, which has become more and more the case, the market integration with neighboring countries helps. Because while you could be a monopolist on the wholesale market in country A, you're probably not the monopolist in country B. And if there is a sizable interconnection capacity, then suddenly there is a competitor, or there are some competitors in neighboring countries. But in most cases, there is a need for governments to step in. They are especially in Eastern Europe or energy community member states, very often the government is the sole owner of those monopolists. So the government can relatively easily step in and say, okay, guys, we need to do something to open the market. And of course, the energy community, and for those countries who aspire to join the EU, the European Commission will say, look, you have a very monopolistic situation in the market. There's no real working market. You need to do something about it. So often governments step in and enforce some structural changes. And sometimes it's also the NRA or together with the competition authority who use an opportunity that comes up. In many countries, there are some either big abuse investigations, or there are some mergers, or a foreign investor wants to come into the market and buy a local company. So suddenly there is a possibility to enforce some competition enhancing measures. And so if the competition authority and the regulator kind of wait for the right time, you can be reasonably successful if you use this opportunity and make sure that once there is a possibility, you step in and actually make some obligations, some conditions for various mergers and investments, and make sure that this happens. There is one other topic, and this is the renewable buildup. As we have seen, renewable are currently already the cheapest form of producing new electricity, not necessarily existing plants, but for new generation plants. So if you look in a country that there are only new and non-monopolist companies, or mostly companies who are not already active on the market, who are able to invest in renewables, then you suddenly build up competitors, and that of course opens up the market. But of course, in every country, you need to adapt to the reality, how much the government is inclined to do this, how much resistance is there, which allies you can find. What I found interesting in many countries, the big industrial electricity users are big allies for competition and regulatory authorities, because they have a keen interest in competitive prices. And they also have considerable influence with the government normally. So if the regulator teams up with them, then they can probably do more than if they just try to do this on a purely legal basis, which sometimes will run into great difficulties and big resistance. Now, let's talk briefly about digitalization. I mean, I was intrigued hearing about all the digitalization plans, which are not that new. I mean, they have been around for many years. And while there is clearly a huge potential for digitalization in the electricity sector, I think we have to recognize that on the ground, the effects have been not that great. I think there is quite some digitalization successfully implemented in the technical sectors of electricity production and trading and so on. There's also some successful implementation on customer-oriented areas, but we're still a long way to go. I mean, smart meter data is not compatible across countries. There are different standards for smart meters in most countries. The access for third parties is sometimes very cumbersome. It takes many years to get that somehow sorted out. There are not many hourly prices being used for pricing electricity, which would be very useful and very helpful in managing the the electricity produced from renewables. There is no instantaneous supplier switching. I mean, technically, with a smart meter, you could really switch in the morning. But if you are able to get a country or all the companies in the country to agree to daily or a couple days switching time, that's already a big success, and it took many years to do that. So I think digitalization has some uses. It's being used in areas that help the companies. It's not so enthusiastically applied in areas which would help customers. And in many cases, the governments or regulators are initiators of digitalization, or the European Commission. I mean, smart meters would never have been applied across the whole EU without this being a legal obligation put into an EU directive. And even then, it took a long time. In 2009, this was written in the third energy package, and I don't know what the European rollout level is, but I'm not sure if it's more than 75, 80%, and the standards are very different. So forced hourly tariffs. We have a few countries that forced the companies to offer hourly tariffs, like Spain, which was quite a success, although we have seen with the big blackout that the large share of renewables is not without risk in the system. And although there are hourly tariffs, which should, in theory, kind of make the demand adapt to the supply or surplus of supply, it's not always working. So I would say outside of the operation and network management, mostly on the TSO levels, who have a fairly good level of digitalization and also, of course, power exchanges, the customer benefit is so far limited. I mean, we still don't have a standard for EV charging, vehicle to grid that's applicable everywhere. I'm not sure if at all there are countries that do have vehicle to grid systems in place that actually work. I mean, there's some pilots, and technically, of course, it works, but doesn't necessarily mean it works in practice. Now, this brings me to the conclusion. I think competition law and regulatory laws in the electricity wholesale market on their own will not market opening and assure competitive prices for electricity. And basically, in Europe, we don't have competitive electricity prices. So, this is the proof that this is true. So we have these laws in place for a while, but the effect so far has not been spectacular. I think digitalization can and is contributing to better enforcement through increased transparency, largely in trading, but not only. So there is a big step forward, I think, and we made some good successes here. And I think to really open the market, responsible authorities, and that's primarily the regulatory authorities, but also the competition authorities, they need to be, let's say, looking out for opportunities and be sometimes pragmatic and say, okay, we can't enforce that now, but we have a plan. And once there is a merger, and there are mergers here, then you can step in. Once there's a bigger investigation by competition authorities, then some obligations could be put on companies in the context of such investigations. So keep an open eye and think a little bit about what would you do if you had an opportunity, because sometimes those opportunities do arise, even though it's not certain that they will at a certain point in time. And then finally, maybe there are a couple of countries that have had struggles in opening up the markets, and there is some lessons to be learned. When you look around, you have countries like the Nordic countries did a lot in opening up the markets and on trading. For example, the enforced short-term contracts for all customers and so on. Or in the Netherlands, you had a breakup of a couple of monopolistic companies. So I think there is quite a body of experience out there. So it's worth looking at those experiences because in the normal process of kind of purely following the law, I think the success of opening up the market, assuring competitive prices that are competitive with, you know, the global electricity prices is going to take a long time, but with a little luck and a little creative measures being enforced on people, on companies, on the sector, it's possible to do some beneficial things. But I think it will still take a couple of years before our electricity price level that is probably 30% too high will go down, and it will be a struggle to get there. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, dear Alta. Thank you for your insights and sharing your wisdom. Before we proceed to open for discussion, there is one question in our chat box. I'm not sure if you would like to take it now or later. Maybe we'll follow up with as this address really the Competition Act by the German Federal Cartel Office, which I think is something very, very specific, something very, very not energy but competition related. So maybe we will follow up later, unless you say you want to add something. I would like to now give the floor to those representatives of national competition authorities who were interested in joining our discussion today. Thank you for being here with us. And for those who think they would like to share their views on the topic, perhaps from their local perspective, I know that we have today here the representatives of the NCA from Moldova and Serbia. Maybe someone else recently joined. So please unmute yourself and feel free to speak up.
Hello.
Hi. Nice to hear you. Nice to see you. I would like to welcome you, Head of National Competition Authority of Moldova, right?
Yes,
and
that's correct.
Please share your views on the topic. Very exciting to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really, my name is Alexei Gerțescu. I'm the head of the Competition Council in Moldova. I'm really happy to participate in this discussion, which is still quite unusual for us for some reasons which I will explain later. I would say that despite the fact that the Competition Council in Moldova, as the National Competition Authority, has the powers to intervene in the energy sector, our role still remains relatively limited because the markets in Moldova, energy markets in Moldova, are still quite heavily regulated in comparison to most of EU countries. And therefore, the primary role of the supervision of the market or creating the rules for it belongs primarily to the National Energy Regulator, the National Agency for Energy Sector in Moldova. And they are responsible for both creating the rules and also supervising how markets function, and also intervene in some of the cases when they see specific market distortions. Nevertheless, despite this being said, we see that this situation does not exclude the role of the Competition Council as the competition enforcement authority. And we had last year, we've closed one of the biggest investigations in the fuel supply sector, where we have established a an agreement, a prohibited agreement between major market participants. But I would say that right now, given this context and the role of the energy regulator and generally the substantial, significant role of the states, both as regulator and also as a market participant through various state-owned enterprises, we mostly see our role as the competition authority as an institution which gets involved in the discussions relating to the functioning of the energy sector and specific energy markets, having consultations with the state, with the agency, and with the government on preventing specific forms of distortions which can be caused by the state itself, and also how to ensure that the state creates this level playing field for those areas where markets are open to competition. There was the topic of digitalization mentioned in the previous presentations. I wouldn't say that it has a major impact on our activity at the moment. So mostly these are general issues that the digitization brings to the activity of most of competition authorities in this part of Europe. So we have we see some challenges in terms of investigations that we may conduct, and the difficulties for conducting investigations because of the new technologies that are being used by market participants. In terms of state aid, we see probably a greater role for ourselves. So we are, besides the fact that we are a national competition enforcer, we are also a state aid enforcer in Moldova. So we exercise a number of functions in enforcing state aid rules in the Republic of Moldova. And again, when it comes to the energy sector, we didn't have too many issues previously to be discussed in this sector. However, last year we examined a new state aid scheme which was notified to the Competition Council regarding the support measures to renewable energy sources to companies which work in the renewables. And the exercise that we did was to compare how this new state aid scheme complies with the rules existing in the European Union. When it comes to specific sustainability criteria or sustainability considerations, when it comes to state aid, again, this hasn't been a major issue which was discussed in Moldova. However, there are some considerations relating to sustainability included into the recent regulation that we adopted at the beginning of this year. So it's a general regulation about procedural matters and procedural issues that we take into consideration when examining state aid matters. And the impact on the environment was one of the criteria which was expressly included into this regulation. And so when it comes to the evaluation of various state aid measures, this is one of the criteria which is taken into consideration. However, it's just it was included into this regulation on quite a broad general level. So we are right now considering including more detailed, more specific rules and considerations referring to sustainability into national state aid rules. But it will also probably depend on the evolution and the discussions which are being held in the European Union on these issues. So what we see over the last couple of months, that there are some quite a lot of discussions in the European Union about the role of green agenda, the green transition considerations in the field of energy, and not just in the energy, in all economic sectors. So depending on the evolutions in the European Union, that will probably also have an impact on the national rules in Moldova. So that would be it from my side at this moment. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thank you very much. You've done even more. You exceeded expectations since you covered a bit with adding comments on the topic of the second panel, which is to be. But I understand you might have also your plans, and if you decided to share on both, that's also appreciated. Thank you for your concise, systematic. I understand that it is still the work forward for the majority of NCAs in our region of contracting parties to get leverage of these artificial intelligence tools, which some other NCAs worldwide already advancing in using, as Dr. Theodor Groza shared with us. So I think, I hope that our guest presentation also was insightful for you, and thank you for being with us. If you could be here for the second panel, I think the more wisdom coming from our guests. Thank you. And
thank you very much.
Given the time constraints, I would suggest for representatives of other national competition authorities of contracting parties to take the floor out of the second panel. And right now, I would like to hand over moderation of our competition forum to our esteemed Deputy Director, Marie-Therese. Please take over the moderation of the second panel.
Thank you, Tatiana, with pleasure. Thank you for also the perfect time management of the first panel. Competition law never comes with its smaller or bigger brother, state aid, and therefore the second panel focuses on state aid and its role in fostering progress, in fostering the green agenda. My introduction to the topic will be very short because I'm lucky that Tatiana put together a panel that touches everything: policy, jurisprudence, private practice, and the industry. Perfect mix. So I will limit my introduction to the topic to a few thought-provoking questions. So my question is whether state aid is so flighty that state aid policy and practice follow the green agenda. Should the green agenda not simply comply with state aid framework? Why do we need to change the state aid policy and practice? Should the law shape the practice, or should the practice shape the law? Furthermore, I'm wondering whether state aid generally can foster green transition, or with all these efforts, is it still hindering if we look at our neighbors who don't have state aid policy? Should we not simply stop trying to loosen state aid control of green technology and get rid of it altogether? Is it not always a deal killer? And finally, I'm wondering, where will the trend take us in the next 5 to 10 years? Stephanie, in her keynote, alluded to the fact that not enough is being done. What will be done? Where will we be in the future? With this, I would like to hand over to the first speaker of my panel, Mrs. Violetta Iftinci from the European Commission. I'm very glad to welcome her back to the Competition Forum. She had been a speaker years ago as well. She's a policy officer at the European Commission and has profound experience in state aid, particularly in the energy sector. The Commission intends to simplify state aid rules by adopting the so-called Clean Industrial Deal state aid framework to accelerate the rollout of renewable energy, deploy industrial decarbonization, and ensure sufficient capacity for clean tech manufacturing in Europe. This framework is planned to be adopted tomorrow, and Violetta is going to share some insights and prospects and view on this act with us. Violetta, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Marie-Therese, for this presentation. I'm happy to be back to the floor of the energy community. I was a speaker many years ago, in I think 2018. And the state aid framework has evolved a lot since then. Thanks a lot to Marieke and also to Stephanie for already giving a bit of a hint of the new developments in the state aid framework. I will now try and share the presentation. Okay, just a moment. Hopefully I'll manage. Okay. Let me know if this this works well. Yes, Marie-Therese, does it work well?
It works. Thank you.
Okay, super. Okay, so yes, you have put a very interesting topic on the agenda, which was enforcement and future development of EU state aid policy in the energy sector. In my presentation, I will briefly touch upon the role of DG Competition in state aid control and the current state aid framework in the energy sector, and go through the new state aid framework in the Clean Industrial Deal framework and the adoption of the new rules, which will happen tomorrow. They are called CSAF, and unfortunately, I can only brief you about the draft CSAF, which have been subject to public consultation, as the final form will only be released tomorrow. So as regards the role of DG Competition, so it is to enforce the competition rules from the treaty. As you know, state aid is generally prohibited, but there are various exceptions. And the DG Competition assesses whether a measure is necessary, appropriate, and proportionate, and also assesses its impact on competition and trade in the internal market. Then it is the responsibility of the member states to ensure compliance with state aid rules and to notify the aid to the Commission on time. State aid cannot be granted without the Commission decision under the so-called the notified aid. As regards the main state aid rules for energy sector at this moment, today on the 24th of June 2025. So first of all, we have the General Block Exemption Regulation, the so-called GBER, which applies to smaller schemes and projects. State aid is involved in this kind of measures, but is exempted from the notification obligation, meaning that the Commission is not required to take a state aid decision. It expires at the end of December 2026. Now we have the category of measures which are so-called notified aid. And here we have the SEAG, which is the Guideline on State Aid for Climate, Environment and Energy. This one, it covers the main sector rules, it applies to large schemes, and it includes a comprehensive assessment. In time, the SEAG has been, accompanied by temporary crisis and transition frameworks. It started with the rules during the COVID-19, and then the rules following the Russian invasion of Ukraine followed. So these are temporary, more flexible rules to support the recovery from various crises, like I've mentioned, the COVID-19 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They will expire soon. And they will be replaced by the CSAF, which is the Clean Industrial Deal State Aid Framework. The new framework will complement existing rules, which is the SEAG. So SEAG will continue to be applicable. The CSAF will move from crisis response to longer-term stability, which will increase planning horizon for member states and certainty for investors. The duration will be until end of December 2030. I will present briefly the Clean Industrial Deal, the Clean Industrial Deal is the EU's business plan. So it is aimed to support the competitiveness and resilience of Europe's industry by accelerating decarbonization and supporting manufacturing in Europe. By also becoming climate neutral by 2050. The new state aid framework sets out how member states can design state aid measures to support their objectives related to the Clean Industrial Deal. The objective of the new rules is to simplify approvals for measures that contribute to accelerating the clean transition without undue distortions in the internal market. Now I will go briefly through the main chapters of the CSAP and the scope of support. And I'll mention there are a few chapters, so 8 to accelerate the rollout of renewable energy, industrial decarbonization, clean tech for manufacturing capacity, and 8 to reduce risks of private investments. As I have mentioned, these rules are aimed to simplify approvals for measures that contribute to accelerating the clean transition. And some examples are, for instance, the use of scheme to facilitate aid granting and reduce red tape. And main facilitations compared to SEAC include no need to public consultation, exceptions from mandatory bidding processes, and inclusion of administratively set aid amounts like aid intensities. I'll go briefly through the main chapters, like, for instance, Section 4, which is the acceleration of rollout of renewables. It is based on TCTF rules on simplified RES support. It allows for technology-specific aid schemes such as wind and solar, while the SEAG requires technology-neutral schemes. They keep the choice between investment support and direct price support, include specific electricity storage, CapEx support schemes, and maintain project implementation deadlines to accelerate rollout. As regards flexibility schemes and capacity mechanisms, which include strategic reserve or market-wide target model capacity mechanisms, the vast majority of requirements provided for capacity mechanisms, which are listed in Annex 1 of the new framework, come directly from the sectoral legislation. So they are not based on state aid rules. They basically take over what is already provided in the sectoral legislation. Then implementation of capacity mechanisms in line with Article 20 to 26 of the, as I said, of the electricity regulation are included as a simple checklist provided in an annex. The new framework does not preclude member states from providing alternative and more complex measures proposals, which would have then to be assessed under the standard rules, which are represented by the SEAG. Moving on to the next section, which tackles the industrial decarbonization. It has a broad scope to support all industry, including energy-intensive industry, but excluding services. It has a broad technology focus, plus natural gas, but subject to certain conditions. It includes also transitional technologies and allows more flexibility on use of natural gas, subject to conditions for generation of industrial heat. In general, it covers measures that deliver significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions or energy savings in industrial installations, regardless of the technology. And it includes special simplifications for innovation fund projects. As regards the section on the clean tech manufacturing, the scope of this section is in line with the former TCTF, the temporary rules. It allows support for manufacturing also outside the so-called assisted areas, and it allows for aid schemes plus ad hoc aid for individual projects as in the TCTF. The new rules also intend to stimulate demand for clean tech equipment, like for instance, use of accelerated tax depreciation to incentivize firms to acquire clean tech equipment. The new rules also include a section on de-risking. meaning that member states can set up funds with public support to reduce the risks for private investors willing to invest in renewables, decarbonization and clean tech manufacturing under certain conditions. Its objective is also to leverage private funds, also from institutional investors. CSAF, the next steps. So the public consultation was open until 25th of April 2025. The new rules are planned to be adopted tomorrow. Meanwhile, the TCTF, the temporary rules for the crisis rules will be repealed, but existing TCTF schemes remain in place until expire at the end of 2025. And the duration of the CSAF framework will be until 31st December 2030. And you have here the link to the new rules, which will be available tomorrow. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Violetta. Very interesting. So tomorrow we'll all wait for the news and see what we have there. It sounds like it will be very helpful also for, having a more detailed framework for certain aspects where we've been struggling in the past. So it's going to be interesting to see how this applies in practice and also how it applies to our contracting parties. This is always a bit of a question because we don't have one-to-one the same rules, but of course we use interpretative guidelines and things like that in the same vein as in the EU. So we'll see whether this will be taken up by our contracting parties as well.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. So now we're moving to a topic that has already been introduced in the beginning and also mentioned by our colleague from Moldovan Competition Council, sustainability in the case law. And for this, I'm very happy to be able to welcome Mr. Julian Novak, who is Associate Professor at Lund University and University of Hong Kong, specialized in competition law and leading scholar in sustainability. And he's currently working on the intersection between AI and competition. He's a renowned author and also author of one of the research handbooks on sustainability and competition law, which will soon come to our very small library in the Energy Community Secretariat. Mr. Novak, thank you for joining, and the floor is yours. You're muted, I think.
I think there's no Zoom
works.
meeting without someone not doing the mistake of unmuting themselves. This time it was me.
For
thanks
taking
so
that
much,
job over.
Marie-Therese, for that kind invitation, and thanks so much for having me. So usually I do antitrust and sustainability. Today I'll do a bit about climate change, clean tech, energy, and so on. I also do, and actually literally this morning I finished writing on state aid and sustainability a bit. So it's always something nice. I'll share with you my slides now. I think it should start in a second. Yes. Now, so this is the kind of title that was placed into the program, and with that title, I thought usually I would speak about cases like Hinkley Point C, which tells us that the court said that, well, the Commission needs to take into account whether projects like Hinkley Point C that receive state aid are compliant with the rules that the EU has on environmental protection. But at the same time, under Article 107, 3C, the Commission does not have to take into account or balance the environmental effects against the competition effects and so on. So that could be something that I talk about, but I think especially when we think about the developments in sustainability and so on, we already had that, and I looked at the other programs, the other panelists' papers, so I thought I'm going to talk about something slightly different. I'm more going to take out a perspective and trying to zoom out a bit and trying to talk about sustainability, in particular with a focus on clean energy and state aid, and give you a bit of a broader perspective. And I'll try to do that in the following way. First, I want to remind you all what state aid is, what actually are we doing here? And we had already something in that regard, but just a bit more on that. Then, what are the broader considerations that the Commission has to balance when they are doing these kind of assessments in state aid? Then also, what is the role of state aid law and state aid rules in the enlargement and in the neighborhood context of the EU? Finally, some of the broader geopolitical influences and developments in state aid law that we have seen in the last couple of years. And then finally, some other options, how state aid rules might be there and could be used to advance the clean energy system. Okay, so if we think about state aid, what is it that we're actually doing? Well, first of all, we need to identify whether we have state aid in the first place. And there we basically look at a number of elements, but the three most important ones are that we're having a selective advantage that is basically favoring or providing some kind of benefits by the state. Can also happen through state-owned enterprises and so on, to an undertaking. So if we have state aid, then the second question comes whether this state aid is actually allowed. Do we allow the state to provide this money to a company? And to answer that question, we can look into a number of different tools. So first we have Article 107 and 106. Those are rules, specific rules where the Commission does have some powers to oversee whether the measures are in compliance with the law. But then there is Article 107.3 in particular C, where the Commission has discretion, where it says the Commission may declare a certain aid measure as compliant with regard to the state aid rules. And this can be, for example, infrastructure, environment, so on, climate change. When you're pursuing that kind of assessment, the Commission can make these kind of balancing exercises and can say, well, overall, we do believe that here the benefits outweigh the harms. And the benefits outweigh the harms. That directly brings me to what are we actually looking here into? What are the broader considerations that the Commission has to balance when they're looking and doing their state aid assessment? And that's sometimes the thing when we are looking so close into how are the different measurements set, which rules apply to which ones, we sometimes forget that. So the basic principle is the following, that the EU and the Commission thus is limited in their power. They are limited by the principle of subsidiarity. Everything that has not been given to the Commission or to the EU remains within the power of the member state. So it would be the member states who starts to do something, except there is a but. The member states can spend their money in the way that they like to spend their money, give their money possibly to companies to provide aid, but they need to comply with the state aid rules insofar as there are effects on cross-border trade and competition within the internal market. So that's essentially what the competition or what the state aid rules, which are part of the competition rules, set up. They say, well, if your measure affects cross-border trade and competition in the internal market, well, then we need to have some additional checks in how you spend your money. And that essentially is to prevent the dangers of, if you like to use that sporting analogy, the doping of your own industry with state money so that your industry can outcompete your competitors' industry. Think about Germany providing tons of aid to its industry and what that would do to a smaller country, let's say the Czech Republic, where the public purse is not so big as in Germany. Essentially, it also is there to prevent a bit of a subsidy race or a race around state aid where one member state tries to outdo the other one and then tries to thereby maybe draw in additional private investment and additional companies that they're going to be relocating there because they get more money. We have seen that in the States. There's a very famous example where Amazon, for example, said, we want to set up our new headquarters And we're gonna like to hear from all the different states and cities. What are you offering us? How much money, what benefits are you offering us for us to come to you? And that's the kind of thing that here the state aid rules are meant to prevent. So you're not supposed to hand out money if you're a member state that distorts competition. However, it's the but. The rules say you are allowed to give out money and to distort competition if you're providing that for a good reason. And that could be research and development, unemployment, sustainability, development of renewable energy, energy security, and all these kind of things. And we have already heard that in the previous speaker who mentioned some of these examples, how you can provide aid and what the Commission says that's perfectly reasonable to provide aid in those circumstances. So that's the overall framework. And then the Commission comes in, and the Commission essentially says, well, I have here my discretion, and I can set these kind of rules and conditions on what I approve as aid. And I can do that in form of guidelines. And we have heard already some of the guidelines that are there. And they can change the guidelines and thereby steer essentially the member states on how they're going to spend their money and make it easier or more hard for them to spend their money on certain things versus other things, and how they set up, for example, the tools and how the financing works and so on. So those are the tools, the guidelines by the Commission to steer what the member states do. In the enlargement, there's an additional element. So the EU state aid rules here have the idea that you can prepare for full compliance once you become a member of the EU. So that might be one thing. Another one's before you're actually joining the EU, there's also the element of opening up markets. So, and that works essentially in two ways. So first of all, maybe we want to use state aid rules to prevent the support of national champions, for example, in the energy sector, so that competitors from the EU and free trading areas can come in and challenge the national champions, maybe. And moreover, the state aid rules also help with transparency, value for money, anti-corruption elements, and so on. If you have to follow these kind of procedures that state aid rules set out, it might be more difficult to have cases of corruption, and you might get more money, more value for the money that the state actually spends. So that's the broader framework. But in general, we have basically always seen since the inception, essentially, of state aid pressure to relax the state aid rules, to loosen the rules also for clean energy. And Marie-Therese already kind of had this kind of, should we get rid of the state aid rules in the renewable sector altogether, was a question. And I think that has been really a push. And I'll just mention a couple of things that have been pushing this. So climate change, the Paris Agreement was a question. Should we maybe have looser rules for state aid because of these kind of issues? COVID was another one we already heard. The subsidy race after COVID with Biden, which had this huge push to clean energy and spend billions on clean energy. Then the war against Russia, against Ukraine, that Russia started, led then to these price hikes in the energy area, which again, people then were calling for loosening of the state aid rules, so to be able to provide aid to their companies. The Chinese renewable energy electric vehicle challenge has also had some effects on trying to call for loosening up the rules. Trump geopolitical and economic power play that's happening at the moment. Again, kind of we should be able to support our companies better in this kind of challenging environment. In the Commission's reaction, and we have seen that, is we have seen at the beginning a revision of the climate change and energy guidelines that are going to run out next year. And then we had these temporary frameworks that my colleague has already mentioned in the presentation before, which are now again being adopted and, so to speak, there were previously there were crisis frameworks, and now there were temporary frameworks. Now they become, from the temporary, they become more permanent, so to speak. Until 2030, we've already seen that. And those are all kind of frameworks where the brakes have been loosened to a certain extent, where it's easier to provide state aid in the area of clean energy. So overall, more freedom to provide aid in the clean energy area. So essentially here, the state aid idea is the Commission allows member states to provide state aid to a huge extent without unnecessary, as they so often say, restrictions. So essentially it's the carrot. The member states are allowed to use the carrot to get their industry, to get their companies to become more sustainable. That's what this whole policy push in loosening state aid is about, trying to make it easier for states to spend taxpayer money on renewable energy. That's one side of the thing. But there is not only the carrot, because state aid rules can also be used, but they're not so often used, as a stick. And I'll quickly say something about that. And here, if we look into the numbers, we can see that there are around like 111 billion euros of fossil fuel subsidies per year in the EU. Those are subsidies. Those are not state aid. So we have made a broad estimate. Certain percentages of these subsidies, not all of them, but certain elements, certain percentage, will be fossil fuel state aid, so to speak. And we estimated earlier in 2021 that it should be around 60%. So a huge amount of this money that goes to fossil fuel industry and to fossil fuel projects is actually subject, or should be subject, to state aid rules. So what would that mean? That means that if they are subject to the state aid rules, we can use the state aid rules to investigate legacy aid for fossil fuel, for the fossil fuel industry and fossil fuel projects, and we can try to prevent new aid to new fossil fuel projects. That's something we can use the state aid rules for. All right, but to wrap it up, state aid law is limited in its purpose. It is only there for certain specific purpose, namely the competition across member states. State aid law navigates the difficult field of societal benefit, for example, clean energy, versus the distortion of competition that happens between member states. And state aid law is a tool that allows the Commission to steer by means of its discretion how the member states are spending their funds, and allows them to spend the funds in certain ways, but not in others. And in the context of clean energy and state aid, we should not only think about the carrot, basically more aid for everyone, that everyone is super happy about, but we should maybe also think sometimes about the stick. Thank you.
Thank you for this also thought-provoking presentation. I will hand over now to a speaker who will take state aid enforcement from this general notion of sustainability to a topic that we've been dealing with a lot in the last couple of months or years already in reality. So an indication of sustainability, which is the hydrogen sector. So a topic that is very a la mode, I would say, hydrogen. And how does state aid help in promoting the hydrogen sector? So very concrete example of what Mr. Novak has already pointed out in his presentation. I welcome Mrs. Marlene Wimmer-Nistelberger from CMS Reicherauer-Heinz in Vienna to the panel. She is partner at CMS Reicherauer-Heinz, an international law firm based here in Vienna. She's an expert in EU state aid law and has vast experience in consulting in regulatory matters, including environmental law issues in Austria and the CE region. Marlene, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie-Therese. Would you be so kind to share my presentation? Or should I do?
Tatiana, can you maybe?
Marlene, you feel free to share the presentation. If you choose us to do it, I can do it if you say so.
I would prefer if you could do it. That would be great. So maybe I could start without the presentation with a few opening remarks. In my view, state aid plays a significant role in promoting the hydrogen sector, particularly during its early development stages, when market failures, high capital costs, and technology risks act as a major barriers to private investment. So what are the most important aspects in my view? When it comes to market failures, correcting market failures, one has to point out the high initial costs and risks. So the hydrogen technologies, especially green hydrogen, require significant upfront investments, which the private sector may be reluctant to provide without support. Furthermore, state aid is necessary for enabling technology development because state aid helps fund research and pilot projects to advance electrolyzer technology, hydrogen storage, and fuel cells. Aid can also facilitate the transition from prototype to mass production, helping reduce costs through economies of scale. It can also, state aid can also facilitate building infrastructure and market demand. So when it comes to the facilitation of infrastructure development, one has to think of the construction of hydrogen production facilities, storage and transport networks, etc. Furthermore, states can support hydrogen use in public transport or certain industries, and therefore create a demand where there is none or not enough. In addition, state aid can provide demand-side support, incentives or subsidies for hydrogen-powered vehicles, for example, or industrial processes or heating systems can build early markets. As was already mentioned before, the state aid rules also apply in the hydrogen sector, and therefore it is ensured that the support is proportional, transparent, and non-distortive to the internal market competition. We will talk later about some of the instruments. And as a last point, state aid can also leverage private investments. As you are aware, state aid often takes the form of grants or loans or equity injections that crowd in private capital. So let's take a very quick look at the evolution of state aid rules. We have already heard about the different frameworks in the previous presentations, so I will make it super quick. The evolution, at least the most recent evolution, started with the CEAC, so the Guidelines for Climate, Environmental Protection and Energy, in the year 2022, which were intended to support the implementation of the Green Deal, to the Temporary Crisis Framework and the Temporary Crisis and Transition Framework, which still applies to aid for certain areas until the end of 2025. Further to the revision of the GBER in the year 2023, which was intended to accelerate the green transition and increase the possibilities for subsidies in the field of environmental protection and energy, to the final step, namely the draft framework, that is CSAF. Good. So based on the timeline I mentioned now, in my view, the following four documents are currently the most important for state aid in the hydrogen sector. These are the CEAC, the GBER, the EU, the TCTF, the Temporary Crisis and Transition Framework, and one instrument which was not discussed today is the communication for important projects of common European interest, so the EPCIA. Let's go a bit into detail of these guidelines and frameworks. So the CERC are a key regulatory framework to ensure state aid in climate and the energy sector, and it makes sure that the aid in this area aligns with the EU goals without undue competition distortions. So what are the guidelines? They provide criteria under which member states can grant state aid support to projects that contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation, environmental protection, and clean energy transition. So what about hydrogen in the context of these guidelines? Hydrogen is explicitly recognized in these guidelines and allows support across the value chain. So it covers production of renewable hydrogen, for example, aid for electrolyzers powered by renewable energy. Electricity is explicitly allowed. Furthermore, low carbon hydrogen, but strict conditions apply in this regard. It also allows aid for hydrogen storage and infrastructure. The aids can support pipeline, hydrogen hubs, underground storage facility, refueling stations. Furthermore, aid can be granted for the demand side support, and the guidelines allow aid for sectors switching to hydrogen, such as industry, one could think of steel and chemicals, and transport like buses, trucks, trains, etc. So let's look at one specific example of a project which is based on these guidelines. Next slide, please. It concerns a German project funded with over 1 billion euro. The aid consisted, next slide, yeah, thank you. The aid consisted of a direct grant and supports the construction of a direct reduction plant and 3 new electric arc furnaces. Furthermore, natural gas will be gradually phased out of the steel production process. In the final phase, the plant will only use renewable hydrogen. And what did the Commission assess from a stated perspective? The measure facilitates the development of an economic activity, so steel production. The measure supports the objective of key EU policy initiatives, for example, Green Deal and the hydrogen strategy. The aid has incentive effect because the beneficiary would not have carried out the investment without public support. The measure is necessary and appropriate to facilitate the production of green steel. And in addition, it is also proportionate because the level of the aid corresponds to the financing need. And what is particularly interesting is that there are sufficient safeguards because if the project is too successful, or at least very successful, there is also a clawback mechanism. And finally, the beneficiary will disseminate the technical know-how gained through the project. So let's go further to the TCTF, which also plays a significant role in accelerating the deployment of hydrogen technologies in response to economic disruptions. What is the TCTF? It was adopted in March 2023, building upon the earlier temporary crisis framework, and it allows member states to grant stated support in response of the energy crisis, increased energy costs for industry, and strategic investments in green transition, for example, hydrogen. What types of state aid are allowed under the TCTF for hydrogen projects? The TCTF allows investment aid for green hydrogen, for example, support for renewable hydrogen production facilities, aid for renewable energy storage, such as hydrogen-related energy storage, for example, underground storage, but also for infrastructures like hydrogen pipelines, distribution hubs, etc. It allows also aid for decarbonization of industry. The amount of aid depends on whether it is administratively set or if a bidding process applies. It varies between 45% and 100%. Please note that investment aid can be combined with operating aid. When it comes to operating aid, the aid type refers to two-way contracts for difference. And for those of you who are not aware of this instrument, a two-way contract for difference is a contract signed between a power generating facility operator and a counterpart, usually a public entity, that provides both minimum remuneration protection and also a limit to excess remuneration. The contract itself is designed to preserve incentives for the generating facility to operate and participate efficiently in the energy markets. And as a last note, I think we heard it today, the aid can be granted until the end of the year, so it will expire. On the next slide, I summarized a hydrogen project which is based on the TCTF. Spain notified a 1.2 billion scheme to support investments in the production of renewable hydrogen in hydrogen clusters and valleys. And the investment supported may include the production of renewable hydrogen-derived fuels, renewable hydrogen storage, and the production of renewable electricity. So to be eligible under the measure, applicants should have secured agreements with off-takers to cover at least 60% of renewable hydrogen expected to be produced. Under the scheme, the aid will take the form of direct grants covering the investment costs of the project supported. The amount for each beneficiary will be determined on the basis of a competitive bidding process, so very transparent. The Commission found that this scheme is in line with the conditions set out in the TCTF. So let's move on further to the GBER. We have already heard about the GBER before, and in the interest of time, I will keep it very short. So the General Block Exemption Regulation allows member states to grant state aid without notifying it to the Commission. However, the measure must comply with all conditions set in the GBER. Generally, the aid amounts in the GBER are not that high, so they apply usually for smaller projects. The updated GBER includes the following type of hydrogen-related measures. So renewable hydrogen production, clean mobility, including hydrogen vehicles and refueling infrastructure, hydrogen use in industrial decarbonization, and hydrogen infrastructure. Let's move on. I think we don't have time to go into detail with regard to the GBER. I just wanted to make mention one last instrument because we did not hear about this today. And this is aid for important projects of common European interest. An important project of common European interest is a large-scale project that is of particular importance for European competitiveness and technological sovereignty. It allows greater government support when several member states and companies jointly invest in strategic future areas such as microelectronics, hydrogen, or battery technologies. So here I mentioned one example that concerns hydrogen. And in this example, the European Commission approved up to 6.9 million of state aid for 33 projects in 6 member states, which aim to unlock private investments of 5.4 billion. And this important project of common European interest include the deployment of large-scale electrolyzers for renewable hydrogen production, new hydrogen transmission and distribution pipelines, and also large-scale storage facilities. And it also includes the construction of handling terminals and port infrastructure. So the EU stated rules also allow quite big investments if member states come together and make a move for which cover more member states. So that was my short presentation, which was focused on hydrogen. If you have any further question, please feel free to contact me. You can find my contact details on this slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you. It's a perfect bridge to our next speaker, who will talk about hydrogen projects from a practical perspective. So this is what I announced with, we also have industry present here. I welcome to the panel Mr. Dr. Maximilian Kühn. He's advisor at Hydrogen Europe. He has over 20 years of experience in various roles, including consultant for government relations, a project coordinator for energy projects at Columbia University, and further from 2013 on as scientific project officer at the European Commission. Currently, Mr. Kuhn is an advisor to Hydrogen Europe with a focus on regulation, codes, and standards. And he's also CEO of his own consultancy, High Standards GmbH, based in Germany. Mr. Kuhn, we're very interested to hear your practical perspective of state aid in the hydrogen sector. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and see some slides.
Yes.
Wonderful. I go. So Hydrogen Europe is the largest European hydrogen association, representing the whole value chain from production to trading to storing, so all of that. And we have one event in the year, the Hydrogen Week, and we hope to see you there in Brussels. It's for free and it's a get-together of the industry. So with that, I kind of present to you what I'm doing, why standardization is important. And then in the second part, we look at what kind of digitalization tools and regulations are currently there and how we see this in the context of hydrogen and what we have done so far. And then in the last text, I close with the state aid, but a lot has been already said by Marlene, so I think it fits very well. We want a fast template rollout. We want economics of scale and mass production, but we also want a need, safety and compliance to avoid liability. That's why we talk about standardization and codes and standards. So for economies like Germany that is export orientated or Europe as a whole, it is important that connectors can connect and plugs plug in to the right socket and trucks can fit into the right tunnels. So I think this is a very good presentation why a standardization is needed in that area. We also recently now published a report on the bankability of hydrogen projects. Also here, the standardization of the financing and the risk mitigation of hydrogen project has been discussed. And from that, we are developing a bankability seal together with DEKRA. So if you want to read this report or you want to become part of the stakeholder dialogue, feel free to reach out to us. So when we talk about standards, so when we talk about green fuels that have been presented, and it has been presented why some things can be funded and why there's a state aid approval for these processes. So these are mostly green premium products. Also because of the transition to decarbonize. But we see all kinds of certification and criteria of green, and it is not well defined globally. However, generally, we have general criteria, energy source, production process, and carbon intensity that defines the product. But we also have advanced criteria like environmental, social ethics, and governance. But these vary across regions and interpretations. I'll give you some examples here. We have two schemes, one from California, one the European, same food waste, same production process, same fuel, but two different emissions allocated to the fuel. So the 5 grams is not positive, it's very negative because the producer is competing with a negative fuel in the US while he has used the same production process and the same input material. So that is why we need global harmonization, and that's why we also need to define what we are talking about and which codes and standards we are looking into. So definitions are very important. Second example here, problem with allocation. So there's a lot of product that co-produce other products, like in this case, the chlor-alkali process for hydrogen production. So we have different input material and different output material. But what you can see is you can allocate the emissions depending on different metrics. It can be energy-based, mass-based, market-based, molar-based, enthalpy-based, or benchmark-based. And here we see you can vary from 7 grams to almost 300 grams of emissions for the same product, the same process, but different allocation mechanism chosen So it's very important that we define what we are talking about, because it has huge implementations here. When we look at the value chain, we see that these green hydrogen molecules, or maybe ammonia or methanol or other products, they are blended and mixed. They come in touch with the system when they're being piped through the pipelines, or they go in the storage, or they are bunkered in the harbor. They become blended with the gray products, and it's important that you can justify or provide your consumer with a green premium, because that's what he's paying for. So that is important, and this can be done by green tokens, blockchain technologies. There's all kinds of digital tools available, and we are really quickly moving into the direction also with tracer molecules to track the right molecules through the value chain. And now I want to touch about the political context here. So in 2019, we had the Green Deal, and within the legislative text, we have something mentioned, an electronic product passport. That has been then also implemented in the Circular Action Plan, in the Energy and Waste Batteries Material Regulation, and lastly, in the Eco-Design Requirements for Sustainable Products, ESPR, which came into force last year, which is then binding for a lot of products. I'll touch that. And also in Red 3, I can see it between the lines. It says advanced and reliable tools to support and document increasing production of renewable energy to facilitate digital innovations in the field. Member states should enable issuing guarantees of origins in fractions or with closer real-time timestamps. So this is also, in my understanding, an opportunity for these digital tools. So when we look at the digital product passport introduced by the ESPR regulation, it impacts a variety of sectors: iron, steel, aluminum, chemicals, detergents, all these, and energy-related products. All these products, they use hydrogen in some kind of way or another, as a precursor or as a reduction agent, like in the iron process. So indirectly, hydrogen is covered within this legislation. And what has been in the COP20 in I think it's COP20 in Dubai, it was signed an international harmonization agreement between member states. So the mutual recognition agreement, sorry for that, the mutual recognition agreement was signed. However, I see a lot of difficulties in this harmonization of national energy policies. And that's why I think the comparability factor, as introduced by a digital product passport, is an easier way to harmonize at a global level. So that is then enabling international trade of molecules. I still have some time, I see. So we have different processes. I don't want to go into detail. I'm happy to discuss this bilateral. Again, if there's more questions. So there's a digital layer and there's a physical layer through the value chain, how molecules and products are being developed. And there's this regulatory column that can be also replaced by a regulatory column for the US, for the Asian market, for the Middle East market. It will affect the metadata sheet, but the metadata sheet is basically collected by the smart meters, by the metering, by these processes that digitalize and collect the information throughout the value chain. And this is also very important. This helps to audit and to certify in a digital way, because we are lacking 50,000 auditors in Germany alone. So we're not talking about Namibia and other regions here. At Hydrogen Europe, we have tested this, and we have presented it last year at the Hydrogen Week, and digital product passport for ESAF, which is the most complex value chain. And we found that it's possible to do this and to trace this. At the moment, also the standardization process is taking place at CEN level for the digital product passport. So why is it needed? Because most of our member state members, they experience a very complex, very difficult, also one-way street process. And we want a very streamlined process that guide these producing companies in a way. And so for most of the people active in the hydrogen value chain, this is something new, and everybody is starting from scratch. So it needs to be a very simple process, and we need to take these producers and also international producers at the hand and help them with their compliance and bringing these products to Europe. So that's why we want this digital product passport in a streamlined process. With this, I think I briefly touched the state aid points. Most of that was mentioned, so I will not go too much into this legal aspect, but I will just show you some applications. So there's a case study on the Power-to-X auction in Denmark. So you see here an example of a state aid process in the hydrogen field. We also have the example of the Hydrogen Bank, which is an auction as a service process. And we also had here the second iteration of this process, and it's continuing. And we have the German national system of H2 Global, which is also a contracts for difference process, which was also approved by state aid. And then lastly, we have the IPSIS, so the large infrastructure investments that have been approved by the Commission for pipelines, for generation technologies, and for end user technologies. So with this, I think I finished my slides, and I think I'm almost in time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us what has been done and what still needs to be done in order to foster the development of the hydrogen sector. With this, I think we'll head over to the audience. If there are any remarks on what we have heard in the second panel, particularly on stated policy and practice and the greening sector. And I do not know, Tatiana, do we have any national authorities that would like to intervene?
I think we should have here still with us head of Moldovan National Competition Authority, as well as I think we have here Serbian, both state aid and national competition authorities. Please give us your voice if you're still with us and would like to share your views on either state aid, what's on your table right now, what's on your desk, what are your concerns. If you have recent cases where you consider sustainability criteria and whether you want maybe to add something related to the first panel, that would be also very much appreciated. And if I can just ask Massimilian to stop share his screen, that would also be good if possible. So here's my last poll. Do we have here representatives of national competition authorities who would like to share their insights and their views on the topics of either panel 1 or panel 2? Please, the floor is yours.
Hello.
May I? Hello again.
Hello again. Sorry.
I was trying to find the button to raise my hand, but I couldn't find it, so I just intervened bluntly into the discussion. So thanks again for this opportunity to speak about some of the issues now related to state aid. I've briefly mentioned them in my first intervention after the first session, and if you allow me, I would maybe I would like to talk about a couple of challenges. I see that we have some of the participants from candidate countries, and I think it would be quite interesting for all of them to talk about the challenges that our countries on our way to the European Union membership have, like the challenges that we have in applying state aid rules in these countries while not yet being members of the European Union. From our perspective, although the main rules about state aid were adopted in Moldova about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, I would still say that there are rather new and still evolving in our country. And like I had a number of discussions with colleagues from other countries from the region, and I can see that it's pretty much the same situation in other candidate countries as well. So the main challenge in this regard refers to the fact that state aid rules are very complex, and they're not. They were created by the European Union for, I would say, its own purposes. And the main objective of these rules were to ensure the functionality of the common market, and to prevent distortions by individual member states, to prevent distortions of this common markets by the measures taken nationally. So when it comes to the application of the same rules in the countries which are not yet members of the European Union, it always becomes a question how we should apply these rules while not yet being members of the or part of the common market. And this is that brings about not only challenges in terms of understanding this concept, these rules, which are, as I said, are quite complex, but actually understanding how you apply them at the national level, while those rules were created in order to ensure a common market of right now 27 countries, if I'm not mistaken. And that creates a number of challenges from the interpretation perspective and also from the application perspective. The second challenge is that we in Moldova, and again, I think it applies to all candidate countries, we are expected to apply state aid rules in the same way as they are applied in the European Union. And that brings about the challenge of properly understanding and properly applying and interpreting these rules in the countries which do not yet have the possibility to refer our cases to the European Commission or to the European Court of Justice. So the challenge is how to ensure that the rules which we read and which exist in the European Union, we apply them in our countries in the same way as they are applied in the European Union. This is a very complex process. Right now, we get the help from the twinning project that we have and experts from 3 EU member countries. But generally speaking, this is always a matter of discussions internally with European experts, how to apply these rules in the same way as they are applied in the EU. And last, probably, but not least, is I should mention the challenge of ensuring the enforcement of these rules at the national level. This challenge consists in the fact that these rules have to be enforced by national competition or national state aid authorities. And these are usually independent, autonomous authorities, but they're still part of the general structure of national public institutions. So when we speak about the European level, the application of these rules is usually enforced and ensured by the European Commission. So it is the Commission and national institutions or specific member countries. So the distribution of power between national authorities or member countries and the Commission is more or less equal. When it comes to the application of these rules at the national level in candidate countries, it becomes more challenging because then it puts the national state aid authority, sometimes against the whole government, who may come with good intentions in order to implement various measures of support for local businesses. And then we're definitely are in an unequal position when it comes to enforcement of these rules, which creates a lot of difficulties, particularly if we accept the idea that a lot of state aid related matters are or can at least become very, very political. So when these national authorities have to enforce these rules at the national level, that may create a lot of challenges for them, and even a lot of tensions between state aid authorities and, broadly speaking, the government. So these are at least the challenges that we face in our activities, and I would be really happy to hear from colleagues from other candidate countries if they have the same issues as we do.
If I may just add, Alexei, what you have just described has been criticized or emphasized already, I think, more than 10 years ago by a high-level reflection group at the Energy Community Secretariat, which pointed out that the setup of having national enforcement system for state aid is intrinsically difficult. The system that is set up in the EU, where the Commission as supranational authority has jurisdiction over admissibility of state aid or not, makes total sense, and we totally know the difficulty in which the national authorities are in. Some of them are not even independent. Some of them are part of a ministry, sometimes even in the past Ministry of Finance. And even if they are independent, as you said, yes, you're criticizing and you're basically stopping policies enforced by your own government, which is a difficult position to be in. And as you said, most of the time there are good reasons behind putting state aid into place. It might not be compliant good reasons, it might be other good reasons, but there are always reasons for it. And it's the setup intrinsically, I think, is extremely difficult. We as Secretariat, what we offer is assistance in reviewing and helping with, as you said, uniform application of state aid acquis, also competition acquis, but also we don't have supranational powers. We can assist you in your task, but we do not have any other powers. And I think the European Commission is also there to assist, but yeah, very limited powers or tools that we have in order to assist, in particularly in the state aid sector.
Yes, Alexei, I can jump in. Thanks a lot for sharing all this. I can only agree with all this, and I think this is all known for my colleagues in the state aid network that are dealing with the accession file, my colleagues in the other units in the state aid and in the international relations unit that are dealing with the accession. So I can only validate and I can only agree with all the points that you have mentioned. Indeed, these are very complex rules, and we are yes, even when we discuss them with the EU member states, yeah, it takes it can take long, and it's complex, and it's yes, and indeed it made for the national authorities, it can put them in a difficult situation with the other institutions. So I can only agree with you, and yes, I know that my colleagues are aware of this and whatever is possible. So I know that the Energy Secretariat is doing a great job in offering assistance, and yeah, thank you.
I think also you essentially, Alexei, you highlighted two very good points. One is the technical complexity, right? That is one question with state aid, and even if you can get around that, and you can ask help from the Commission or the Secretariat or other experts, you still have the point, the political question, right? Is it that, and I'm going to now be a bit blunt, will you put the life of your agency on the line for a state aid decision? And I would say no. You cannot do that. The competition agency as such, which if they also have a task to look after state aid, they cannot basically say, no, you cannot do this state aid, even if it is absolutely illegal. If they risk otherwise the backlash that they are saying, well, then let's get rid of this competition agency. Okay, there are like some protections that you might have, but if push comes to shove, the government with the legislator sits on the better cards in this game. So I think it's a very difficult position that agencies like yours are in. It's not that you can ask a supranational authority, right? Like the commission, like you mentioned, but what, and I think asking the experiences from other agencies around the region might be something. But what I was thinking is a very sophisticated agency that now has to deal with this, even though they didn't have to do that before, was the 28th member state, the UK. Right? They didn't have to deal with all these kind of problems before, and now suddenly the CMA has to deal with state aid matters. It's a slightly different problem, but they suddenly also have, and most likely they have all the expertise in applying the rules, but they have this kind of strange relationship with the government, and maybe they also have some expertise. And we have all read the stories about the head of the agency who had suddenly had to go because apparently the decisions were not as pro-growth as they should have been. So I really sympathize with your position there. But maybe it's about telling the government, no, you can absolutely do this. It's just like a little bit that you need to tweak it here, and then we can help you.
Yeah, so true, so true. But we will try maybe to share our experiences now with our UK colleagues on how to do it nationally.
Do we have any other interventions or questions in the chat? I don't see any. If not, I think I will hand over to you, Tatiana, for closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you indeed. Well, I prepared some key takeaways, which I think even too much maybe, but stop me when they get very boring. So I think we here had really a big marathon, given its online format, but we had a very dynamic, very progressive, and very insightful. And special thank you for Moldovan NCA representative for being here, and I feel like speaking for all NCA's contracting parties, so not for so, but thank you for being here and speaking loud. So here, 9 takeaways that I prepared from today. Digital transformation of the energy sector is one of the key enablers for achieving strategic objectives, which are ending reliance on Russian fossil fuels, tackling the climate crisis, and ensuring access to clean and affordable energy for consumers and businesses. The second one, there are benefits of digital transformation of the energy sector, such as better customer mobility via easier supply switching, thus more competition among suppliers. Secondly, better grid management and demand response. Third, with benefits, of course, there are risks coming. Firstly, vertically integrated incumbents can exploit control or infrastructure to foreclose competitors in downstream markets. Platform issues such as self-preferences practices, then risk of coordinated behavior and market manipulation. Fourth takeaway, NCAs worldwide already make a good use of artificial intelligence tools as workflow management tools, as a chatbot to help agency staff access institutional knowledge, as a sophisticated tool to recognize complex patterns of suspicious behavior, and many more, as one of the speakers, Dr. Theodora Groza, mentioned. The fifth takeaway is competition law and regulatory law on their own will not assure market opening and competitive prices for electricity, as Walter Bolz shared with us. Digitalization can contribute, not necessarily help, to better enforcement via increased transparency, but most likely in trading. Clean industrial deal that is coming is the EU's business plan for energy-intensive industries and clean tech in order, firstly, to support competitiveness of European industry, accelerate decarbonization, and accelerate rollout of renewables. With CID comes Clean Industrial Deal State Aid framework to be adopted, as we all know, already tomorrow. And almost the last one, bear with me for now. State aid may be necessary in the hydrogen sector to correct market failures, enable tech development and innovation. And so the last one, I would like to conclude with a key message that our keynote speaker opened our forum, which is the infrastructure choices made today will shape competitiveness and energy security for decades to come. With that, I thank you all for bearing with us. I still see a lot of participants in our participants list. And from my side, that is it. Thank you for being here, and thank you, and see you soon many times, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.